myself, and then I will also ask my co-hosts to introduce themselves. And then for everyone else who is joining us, you could kindly type your name and institutional affiliation in the chat section so that we know who you are and where you're joining from. My name is Dr. Irene Nyamu, and I will be your host during this webinar, which is hosted by Jaslika. And I want to just quickly say that Jaslika is a consulting firm that is based in Nairobi, and we do research and development consultancy work, and we focus on education, child rights, environment, and technology, and I am one of the associates in that organization. I am also the chair of Women Educational Researchers of Kenya work, which is also an organization that focuses on research and advocacy work in the area of gender and education. And in my own right, I also do research work around those areas that I have mentioned that are either undertaken by Jaslika Consulting or Women Educational Researchers of Kenya. With me today as a co-host is Esther Nyambura. At Jaslika and also at work, we believe in empowering young people. So I'm going to ask Nyambura to introduce herself briefly, and then I will give you the agenda of today's meeting. Before Nyambura comes on board, I'd like to also mention to the participants this evening that we will be recording this session, and the fact that you joined means that you have consented, and if you have reservations, we will kindly ask that maybe you drop off from the webinar, but we will be recording because we want to eventually transcribe some of the key discussions that are coming out of this and record with accuracy. But this is for internal use. It is not going to be used in any other way beyond the learning and enrichment of the conversations we're going to have. So let me welcome my co-host and moderator to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Esther Nyambura. I'm Jaslika Youth. I'm also a research assistant. Right now I'm a research assistant at Felt Africa Group. I do research in gender equality, human rights, and right now civic education. Karibuni sana. Welcome to our webinar. Irene,
you're muted, Irene.
Sorry, excuse me for that oversight.
You're mute again.
Okay, I don't know what's happening. Is it? Yes, it should be on now. So thank you, Nyambura. And I just want to give you a quick overview of why we are here today, the main goal and objective of this webinar. And then I will bring on board the panelists. We have 4 very, very exciting panelists that we're looking forward to hosting and having a great conversation. And then we will also invite the audience to also be part of it. So today we are talking about the Maputo Protocol, or another, well, the Maputo Protocol is also called the Protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the Rights of Women in Africa. And it so happens that we recently commemorated, in July last year, we commemorated the 20th anniversary since adoption of the Maputo Protocol. And this is monumental in many ways, because it is one of the most comprehensive human rights instrument and policy document that looks at gender equality and women's empowerment in a very encompassing manner, and it is framed within the African context. So this is very, very exciting, and one of the panelists will be delving deeper into it. But then the reason why we are hosting this is because, oh, sorry, I should first, I should display this, but I'm sure you'll later on be able to have a greater look at it. I don't know whether it's visible to everybody, but it's a very huge, voluminous book, but it's available as an open access book, which you can get your hands on. And we have one of the co-editors of this document, which looks, which really was a project to develop a commentary on all the articles that are within the Maputo Protocol in terms of looking at the definitions, the implementation, and even some of the challenges that have emerged in interpreting some of the meaning and how different states within the African continent have actually realized the aspirations and the provisions that are made in the Maputo Protocol. And so in today's discussion, we are looking at Article 12, which is the right to education. And so two of the authors who developed this chapter, the commentary on Article 12, Dr. Celestine Musembi and Dr. Sheila Wamahio will be here to talk to us about this very exciting project that looks at how far we have gone in terms of realizing gender equality and women's rights and empowerment. They co-authored one of the chapters. Dr. Celestine Musembi has also written two of the other chapters. One is a commentary on Article 6, which looks at marriage. And then there's also a commentary on Article 7, which looks at issues of divorce and property rights of women. So this is a very rich group that will be taking us through this process. And in addition to that, we will have, we also have two additional panelists, and this is Dr. Purity Gina, who is the Commission Secretary and Chief Executive Officer of the National Gender Equality Commission in Kenya, NGEC. And then we have Ms. Yasmin Mohammed, founder and Pan-African feminist activist, who is going to talk to us about the implementation and the realization of the rights and provisions that the Maputo Protocol has provided in terms of grassroots efforts and the enjoyment, particularly by marginalized communities and groups. So those are the four panelists that we're going to be having conversations with. And in terms of running this session, I will give each of the panelists 20 minutes 15 to 20 minutes to make their presentation. And then this will be based on their areas of expertise, and my co-host Nyambura will be mentioning what aspect of their presentation they will be focusing on. And then once they have done that, then we will have a session of discussions between the moderators and the two authors and the other two panelists, and then we will have a process of inviting the audience to also, give their comments or ask questions, seek clarifications, and even add to the conversation in terms of how to move the work forward in terms of ensuring that there's greater enjoyment of women's rights and gender equality, both within the continent and more specifically in Kenya. The commentary itself focuses on Africa broadly, and Dr. Celestine Musembi will be talking about that because she was one of the three editors. The other editors are Professor Annika Rittman, a law professor in the University of Stellenbosch, South Africa, and Professor Teresa Makunya, who is a professor of public law, University of Goma, and a visiting professor in Lyon University in France. So those were the three editors, and we are privileged to host one of them in our webinar today. You have the opportunity to ask questions. So there are two models. There are those who are participating in the webinar within the chat space, within the Zoom space that we have provided. And there are those others who are going to be participating through the streamed option. If you're in the streamed option, you can only type in your questions on the chat. Those who are within the chat room, they will have an opportunity to unmute themselves and ask the question directly, or else they can still go to the chat section and put down their questions. So I once again warmly welcome you. And I want to give each panelist a minute or two to introduce themselves, and then they will then be ushered in by my co-moderator, Esther Nyambura. So I will start with Dr. Celestine Musembi. Yes, you can do your self-introduction.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for taking time to attend the webinar. We look forward to an exciting time together. I think a lot has already been said about me. I'll simply add that I'm based at the University of Nairobi. I teach at the law school, and I teach in the areas of property and family law and various dimensions of human rights. In terms of my research, I research on the intersection of law and culture, taking a legal anthropology perspective, and what impact that has on property matters within the family, particularly the outcomes for women and girls in marital property, in inheritance. I also do research on social and economic rights, specifically on food security, on implementing community land rights, on right to housing, right to water. I think that sums up who I am and what I do. So I look forward to an exciting time together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Celestine Musembi. Next is Dr. Sheila Wamahio. Please take 2 minutes to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Irene. I think I know most of you here in this chat room, and I'm sure I know many of those who have joined on live stream. I am the director of Jaslika Consulting and Foundation, because we have a foundation now. Like Celestine, I'm also an anthropologist. My master's is in anthropology and PhD is in education. I've been involved in research at the intersection of education, child rights, women's rights for many, many years. I think I'm a feminist with the DNA of feminism embedded in me, having given that my mother was a feminist as well. So I grew up in that kind of an environment. And been in Kenya for about over 40 years. And I've been privileged to be not only having founded Jaslika, but also founding some of the organizations, being co-founder, especially the founding chair of Work. I'm happy to see the Work represented here very strongly. We have Irene, the current chair, as well as past chairs, Dr. Limboro, Professor Buni, and the CEO, Sophia Yega. We also have other organizations that have been contributed to founding, including the Girl Child Network. I don't know whether Mercy is here yet.
Yes, I'm here, Sheila. I'm here. Thank you.
Nice to see you, Mercy. And many others, Girl Child Network, FAWE Regional and FAWE Kenya, and many other organizations that I've been involved with as part of my activism and as part of my research work and my advocacy work that I've done over the years. So I think I will stop there to give enough time for our discussions. So back to you, Irene.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Wamahio. Next, I will ask Yasmin Mohammed to introduce herself.
Thank you very much, Irene. My name is Yasmin Mohammed. I'm in my final year at Catholic University, pursuing bachelor's degree in development studies, and also founder and director of a feminist organization based in the informal settlement of Kibera in Nairobi, Kenya, where we exist in challenging layered oppressive structures that makes women and girls not to thrive. I'm happy to be here today, being surrounded by these amazing and phenomenal women. I'm so happy to be in this space and looking forward to delving deeper into the Maputo Protocol. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Yasmin. You're bringing in great energy and enthusiasm, which we like. Let me just check very quickly. Is Dr. Purity Gina in the room now? I need. Okay, she's not here yet. As I had indicated, she is the current Chief Executive Officer of the National Gender Equality Commission, and she will be joining us maybe later on. She's been very, very involved previously in research around the area of education, particularly assessment of the 21st century skills and several other elements around the quality of education and ensuring that children actually go to school and learn, and there's a good basis for evaluating what they learn. So she'll be talking much more about herself and what the NGEC is doing in terms of promoting, protecting, and realizing, ensuring the fulfillment of women's rights, as well as ensuring that marginalized communities equally enjoy their rights and that there is gender equity. So I will now pass the baton to Nyambura. Please take us to the next segment.
Thank you, Dr. Irene. I'll take you through now the presentation. As Dr. Irene had mentioned, the panelists have 15 to 20, let's say 20. So I'll be timing. So I'll talk any pressing. Then we'll proceed to the next panelist. So our first panelist is Dr. Celestine Musembi, who's one of the co-editors for the protocol, for the commentary. And she's going to take us through the historical and contextual background of the protocol. Karibu, Daktari.
Okay, thank you very much. Just taking a moment to share my screen there. Okay, I hope you can see the screen.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Okay, that's what Irene was trying to show earlier. Dr. Nyam was trying to show earlier. They're just the cover of the commentary. That's what it looks like. And there's three of us who co-edited it. She already told you who the others were. I'll only just add that Professor Radman left Stellenbosch earlier this year, and she's now back in her native Sweden at a university called Karistad. Tresa Makunya is also based at the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. And actually that center is the one that sponsored the publication. That's why you're able to get it on open access, okay? Because they fundraised for a grant for it. Their ambition is that this is only the first of several commentaries that they intend to do on the various regional human rights documents in the African regional human rights system. So hopefully there will be funding to sustain that very ambitious project, which is quite laudable. I will start with a background on the protocol itself, and then say something broadly about the commentary, the project, and then I'll hand over to Sheila now to focus on the Article 12 itself. Okay. So the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, we had that since 1981, which is the Regional African Human Rights Charter. If you're familiar with the regional human rights system, each region basically is encouraged to have a charter that domesticates, not quite, more like contextualizes the international human rights regime for itself. And all regions do, except for Asia. Okay? So the charter we've had since 1981, and Article 66 of the charter makes provision for later development of the further agreements that expound on any dimension of the charter. Okay? So women were only referred to in one small sub-article, that's Article 18.3 of the charter. And so there'd always been contestation around whether that's adequate or whether we need to have a specific treaty or additional protocol on women's human rights. So that's really what gives the Maputo Protocol a basis, okay? It springs from that provision, Article 66, which allows for further treaties, and then also the inadequacy, the perceived inadequacy for 18.3, okay? When did the drafting begin? Well, if you remember, in 1995, there was that conference that was hosted in Beijing, the UN Conference on Women and Development, which had been a series, really, starting from 1975, like every decade there'd be a conference. So the regional mobilization for it, the pre-conference meeting in Dakar, that's really where the momentum picked up on the need to have a specific regional charter or regional treaty on women's human rights in Africa. So a year later, the OAU, Assembly of Heads of State, officially established a working group to begin the work of drafting the charter. So the first draft came out in 1997, and that was adopted in the city of Nouakchott in Mauritania. And then further work was done on it. Then in 1999, a second draft came out called the Kigali draft, because that's when the drafting team met up and issued this second draft. Now, there had been a parallel initiative that was going on under the OAU, which was drafting a convention on elimination of harmful practices against women and girls in Africa. So then the discussion was that there shouldn't be two parallel initiatives. Can you achieve a merger? After several attempts, a merger was achieved in 2000, and what they came out with was then referred to as the final draft. Okay? And then it went a little quiet. 2001, there was some meeting around that draft, but not much came out of it. But in 2003, this final draft was subjected to quite a lot of a review by a forum that was convened under the leadership of Equality Now and several other NGOs. And they engaged with the council of the OAU, and they came out with a draft. Well, they gave their feedback to the official ministerial team that was in charge of the drafting. And that team then issued the Addis Ababa draft from the 2003 meeting. That was early 2003. That's what then became adopted as the final text in July. That's what we're celebrating the anniversary in July this year. It took just about 2 years for the protocol then to come into force. That is on having attained the 15th ratification by the 15th state. So currently, as we speak, only 12 states have not ratified the Maputo Protocol. Okay, some you would say usual suspects. They're on the list of non-ratifiers of almost every convention. That's Somalia, Sudan, but some that you wouldn't expect, like Botswana, on that list of 12. Overview of the content. It has a lengthy preamble. That's not unusual for many treaties, but particularly for human rights treaties, because then the preamble positions that agreement in the pedigree of other treaties that have come before it. It gives a rationale for the protocol. Why do we need an agreement on this? And in the case of the Maputo Protocol, it explains clearly that despite African states having ratified all these international treaties, there's still a persistence of the violation of women's human rights. And therefore, we need a treaty that addresses the specific context of Africa and grounds it within the previous treaty regime. So it has 25 substantive articles, meaning that they guarantee specific rights, okay? And then 7 articles deal with the operational matters, like when will it come into force, who will oversee its implementation, how will states report, etc. So that's really overall the structure of the protocol, or the content of the protocol. So what's unique about it? What are the strengths of the Maputo Protocol? Well, I think it really needs to be mentioned that among the regional human rights regimes that I mentioned, the inter-American system, the European system, African, Asia doesn't really have one, although there are a few non-binding agreements here and there. Ours is the only one that deals comprehensively with women's human rights. The inter-American regional system has a treaty, but it deals with eliminating violence against women. It's the only one, the Maputo Protocol, that takes on the subject of women's human rights and deals with it as a regional treaty in its own right. The second thing that's remarkable is that it has a very comprehensive definition of discrimination against women. Now, CEDAW already did that. That's not unusual. But here's what it says. So it defines discrimination against women as any distinction, exclusion, or restriction, or any differential treatment based on sex, and whose objectives or effects compromise or destroy the recognition, enjoyment, or the exercise by women, regardless of their marital status, of human rights and fundamental freedoms in all spheres of life. Okay? Now, CEDAW reads almost exactly like that, except that CEDAW also says on a basis of equality of men and women. Okay? Now, it's seen as an advance on the part of the protocol that it dropped that phrase, okay, on a basis of equality of men and women, because the assessment of the equality for women shouldn't have to depend on comparison to a male standard, okay? So it talks about substantive equality, addressing the actual realities of women, not, never mind whether it compares to men or not, okay? It's not the point. And then, of course, talking about all spheres of life. So it's seen as the highest expression of a substantive equality standard as opposed to a formal equality standard. Okay? And we make a big deal about this in the commentary, in all the articles that we analyze. Okay? The third thing to highlight is that really it looks at women, African women in all their diversity. Okay? So it talks about the rights of all the women, about the girl child. You won't see this phrase girl child in CEDAW, for example. And Dr. Omayu will tell you, I mean, they had to fight for that quite a lot, all the way from Dakar, because there was pressure to drop that language and just stick with women. Okay? But it's felt that there are specific issues on the continent that require putting that spotlight on the girl child. Then there are also provisions on the rights of women with disabilities, women who are widowed, women affected by armed conflict, women living in poverty and distress, etc. So really it employs the lens of intersectionality. Okay? Not to say that CEDAW doesn't, but actually CEDAW does that only to a small extent. Article 14, for example, talks about the rights of rural women. But as far as I know, that's about the only instance where CEDAW actually looks at gender discrimination as overlaid with something like rural marginalization. Okay? Also, in terms of the minimum age for marriage, it's the first treaty to actually stipulate 18 as the minimum age for marriage. The Children's Rights Convention doesn't give an age. It defers to national legislation, right? CEDAW doesn't set an age either. So the protocol is actually charting a very bold path by saying we can agree on a precise age, and it's 18. Okay. The other dimension is that it takes into account culture in a nuanced way, and one that doesn't oversimplify, okay? So it takes on the idea of culture as both a resource for and as a threat to women's human rights, which is really the reality that we live in. So you look at Article 17, it talks about guaranteeing women the right to live in a positive cultural context, okay? And to be participants in shaping cultural policies, etc. Article 5 then talks about protecting women from harmful practices. They don't even say harmful cultural practices, but it's quite clear that it's directing its attention at that. Okay? As opposed to when you read some interpretive statements from CEDAW, where culture is almost always portrayed as something that is a threat to women's human rights. I've written an article on that. I can give references for later, just comparing the two and their approach to the question of culture and legal pluralism. And then finally, the Maputo Protocol, it grounds women's human rights in African realities, because you'll find there right to sustainable development, right to a healthy and clean environment, ideas about political and economic marginalization, food security, armed conflict. So it's not disconnected from the day-to-day realities that you recognize as being issues that are of concern on the continent. So very contextually grounded. Okay, so having given the background on the protocol in general, I just want to say a few things about the commentary generally, okay? So Dr. Nyamu in her introduction said that it's a legal commentary, so it is a particular genre. So you will see other commentaries, for example, there's one quite comprehensive on CEDAW, and the idea is to simply aid people in understanding, interpreting the legal concepts being covered there, what are the definitions that matter, basically the conceptual grounding, and then what the scope of the government obligation is. What exactly do states commit to do when they ratify this treaty? And then some issues about implementation and how to be implemented. So it really goes article by article, giving that analysis. So it's different from, say, an article in even a law review or a social science journal, because there you'll be giving your perspective on some theme, okay? This one is not thematic as such, except to the degree that you can identify a theme in the article, okay? It's really an analysis, like taking apart the different components and helping somebody understand. Importantly, also giving the drafting history to show how the thinking evolved and how we ended up with what we have. Okay? So in the course of doing that, you'll see that we emphasize a lot whatever interpretive statements have been issued by the bodies that are regarded as authoritative in interpreting that treaty. So if there's anything from the African Court of Human Rights, for example, we'll give it prominence. Any general comments issued by the African Commission, even by CEDAW. So in seeking to understand how those terms are used, we will go there first, because those are the sources that are seen as authoritative. Okay? If we can blow our trumpet a little, we were surprised to find that no one had done a commentary on the Maputo Protocol before, a legal commentary. And yet, we were looking at 20 years of the protocol. So it is the first and only one so far, right, that you'll find doing that kind of analysis of the Maputo Protocol. And I mentioned earlier it was commissioned by the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria, and it's hoped that it will be the first in a series of commentaries on the Africa Regional Human Rights treaties. Okay? And we launched it last July at the University of Nairobi, and then my lead editor also had a launch event in Stellenbosch. And there's the link through which you can access the book on open access. And when you click on it, you can download either the entire book, 670-something pages, or you can just go to the chapter that you're interested in and just download them as separate chapters. Then it's not too heavy on your system. Let me give you a sense of how each of the chapters is organized. Because it being a commentary, we had to have some kind of a, not uniformity, but some kind of harmony across the chapters, so that if a person is looking for definitions or the concept of equality, then they expect to find such a section in all the chapters. Of course, we allowed for variation where the content of the article required it. Okay? So you'll find these 6 main sections in the chapter. First, the introduction. In the introduction, we reproduce the text of the article that you're analyzing. And then you give a sense of the context, why the issue is of concern in the African context. So for example, for the article on marriage, we start by giving some crucial statistics, like the high incidence of child marriage or the high incidence of unregistered marriages on the continent, and what problems that poses, especially for women, to show, okay, why is this important? Okay. Then in the second section, we look at the drafting history of the article. I cited those different drafts that it went through. For some issues, you can see how contested an issue was by how many times it changed as the drafts went by. or by how shall I put it? Literally, it didn't show up in the first or second draft because there was serious opposition and only made it through. Yeah, so you can tell something about what issues are contested, what issues were worth fighting for. Those who were there saw as worth fighting for. So it does give you something, the drafting history. Now, of course, for others, the history is quite innocuous. It doesn't give you much. And then we go to the interlinkages, basically situating the particular article that you're analyzing in context with other articles within the protocol, and then with other provisions in other international treaties, other regional treaties, and then also in soft law. So that gives someone a sense of where that issue fits in. Okay. Then the fourth section is the conceptual and definitional section. And there now you'll extract all the key terms and concepts in the article, and then you will give the definitions of that, drawing from the jurisprudence that already exists from other treaty bodies. I mentioned also from the African Court. If there isn't, then we're also consulting dictionaries, to find a sense of what does this mean. When you talk about consent, for example, in marriage, what jurisprudence has emerged on consent, okay? And then we go to spelling out the nature and scope of state obligation. What is the state actually being required to do by this article? I'm hoping that Dr. Amahi, when she speaks about Article 12, will actually talk about how we broke down the components of state obligation under Article 12. If she doesn't, remind us to come back to that. So that was my illustration, so I don't spend too much time drawing from other articles. The final section focused on the implementation. And here, basically, the idea was to give a sense of what progress have we made, okay? And we drew from the state reports that states submit rather, in this case to the African Commission, because the Maputo Protocol didn't set up a separate reporting structure of its own. It just piggybacked onto the reporting structure for the African Charter, which is under the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. So that was the primary place we went to look at the state's reports and the concluding observations that the Commission gave on each state report. That gives you a sense of the progress from the state's own perspective, and then under interrogation from the Commission. And then we supplemented that with any national courts that have applied provisions of the protocol, how have they developed the jurisprudence. And then we also looked at external sources, right? Because you know that there's the shadow reporting provision where civil society groups, for example, or coalitions of civil society groups can present an alternative report to the treaty body. So those two also became a source of information for us in assessing progress. So that really is what you will find in each of the articles. Of course, now some of the articles, like the operationalization ones, won't allow for this kind of structure. So there is really just analyzing and giving a sense of what the article is about. So like I said, we deviated from this structure when the nature of the article demanded it.
Dr. Musa, you have 1 minute.
I can stop here. It's all right. This was just to a final slide to give an overall assessment.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, in implementation. So here I'll have to start with a disclaimer rather. We worked so hard on the individual chapters, looking at the individual articles, that under the publication pressure that we were under, we didn't do the ideal thing we would have liked to do, which is to step back, review all those articles and all their conclusions and say, okay, taking several steps back, what we do say has been the progress in implementing the protocol overall. That we didn't get to do. So that's opportunity for further work, maybe supplemented by in-country research, maybe even sector-specific research, okay? But here are some highlights from the overall impressions from the chapters that I managed to author or co-author, and then the ones that I go to edit in close detail, okay? That there's a general problem of non-compliance with the guidance that the Commission has given to states that they should report specifically on the Maputo Protocol. What we saw in, I would say 90% of the cases is that the reporting is under the African Charter, and then there will be a little section just making mention of the protocol, or none at all, because states took the view that if they report on Article 18.3 of the Charter, they've talked about discrimination against women. That's quite adequate. So the Commission's own guidance on having a separate report or a separate detailed section in the protocol was not being complied with. Okay? Then lack of rigor in data generation and disaggregation, which makes monitoring difficult. I'm sure Dr. Amahi will talk about this specifically in the area of education, because we found that to be a real problem there. Okay. Then we saw a lot of missed opportunities where in litigation before national courts, they'll be dealing with an issue of gender discrimination, and there's no mention of the protocol, a complete missed opportunity. Even where you have an NGO or civil society group filing an amicus brief, and they don't mention the protocol. So we noted that as a trend. Okay? So that's why we highlighted the crucial role of civil society, because even in those cases where the protocol is not mentioned, those issues are picked up thanks to civil society initiatives. So we just need to go a step further and be deliberate about using the protocol. Okay? This is something that we highlighted, especially in the articles to do with the family, inheritance, anything that required negotiating at the family level, for example, or engaging in social transformation of attitudes. There was a refrain that kept coming up among states that, we've done this much, we've enacted these laws, but there are deep-seated cultural beliefs, or there's resistance, or there's deep-seated established practice in the hinterland. I never thought I would see such a word in a state report, but we came across it in several instances. So sort of like the state sort of resigning itself. We can only do so much, but we have to give some room for all these deep-seated beliefs. And there's no sense of we're going to make progress in this manner. So that was a bit troubling, and we raised that in several of the chapters, actually. The example I've put there, I can mention it later, but it was a case against Mali, where state actually said they pleaded what in public international law we call force majeure. It's like an act of God, we have this opposition, and we had to dilute a draft law that we had because we encountered such opposition, pretty much rebellion. But they were told clearly by the African court, a state cannot plead helplessness. Yeah, you're still responsible for implementing what you committed to in the charter. So I think that gives you a sense of where the project stood from the perspective of the whole commentary. Then now we can delve deeper into the issue of the right to education. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Celestine. That was a very good synopsis of how the commentary came about. Due to time, I think if there's any pressing comment, we can proceed to Dr. Sheila. Are there any pressing comments, or because the questions are going to come in after the presentation, so I think we can move to Dr. Sheila, and she's going to take us through the Article 12, which she co-authored with Dr. Celestine. Dr. Sheila.
Thank you, Nyambura. Greetings once again, everyone. And thank you, Celestine, for setting the stage for a deeper discussion of Article 12, the right to education chapter, which I had the privilege of co-authoring with Dr. Musembi. I would also like to take this opportunity to recognize two members of Jaslika Youth who helped me with the research for this publication. And one of them is no other than Esther Nyambura, who is your co-moderator. Esther, can you wave? And the other one is Jasmine Wangari, who is monitoring the chat. Jasmine, where are you? Oh, there she is. So these two young people spent sleepless nights doing the research and supporting me in this process. Without the help of the two of them, and of course, Dr. Musembi, this chapter would not have seen the light of the day. So thank you, everyone. As we all know, education is recognized as a fundamental human right. And it is actually embedded in about 23 soft laws, instruments, and 48 international and regional instruments. Though the Maputo Protocol elaborates on this right in Article 12, it applies it to the education of women in Africa. So this is something that is quite significant. As Dr. Musembi said, there are others, the African Platform for Action that came in 1994 and others, but this is a very significant instrument that focuses on education, moving away from the general statements of the African Charter, for example, Article 17, which really just talks very broadly about the right of every individual to education. Now, today I know Celestine said I will be doing this and that. I may not have time to do all that given the time in hand. So, and I'm going to put my timer, knowing that I can go over time. What I will do is maybe focus on, I'll go almost straight to the implementation. But one thing I would like to know is, despite the significance of the Maputo Protocol for realizing the right of women and girls to education and to gender equality, very little is known about this. There are very few people, especially from the education sector, that actually use this protocol. And so part of the purpose of this webinar today is to raise awareness on this protocol through an exploration of Article 12 on the right to education. But first of all, what are the provisions of Article 12? Like I said, in Article 17 of the African Charter, it is very brief. The right to education is described very briefly. But in this Maputo Protocol, it goes deeper, and it requires state parties to eliminate. You'll excuse me, I'll be reading a lot so that I don't talk and go over my time. So I'll read if you don't mind. The Article 12 requires state parties to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women and guarantee equal opportunity and access to them in education and training, eliminate all stereotypes in textbooks, syllabuses, and the media, protect women, especially the girl child, from all forms of abuse, and provide for sanctions against suspected perpetrators of such practices. They must also provide access to counseling and rehabilitation services to women who suffer abuses and sexual harassment, integrate gender sensitization and human rights education at all levels of education curricula, including teacher training. The article also obligates states. Oh, there is Dr. Gina has come in. Welcome, Dr. Gina. The article also obligates states to promote literacy among women, promote education and training for women at all levels and in all disciplines, especially in science and technology, promote enrollment and retention of girls in schools and other training institutions, and organize programs for women who leave school prematurely. Education and training and related issues are also explicitly mentioned in more than a third of the 24 substantive articles of the Maputo Protocol, which acknowledges education as a strategy for the achievement of other human rights. The protocol further commits itself to eliminating barriers to education rights like violence against women and girls, including harmful practices like FGM and child marriage. So it takes an intersectional approach, because one has to also read some of the other articles of this protocol to really get perspective on what it is saying about the barriers to education and other barriers to the empowerment of women and girls. So my presentation, because in the interest of time, I will spotlight my findings in three key areas, namely reporting and data. And I'm very happy that Dr. Gina has joined us now, because I think this is important for her, the issues on reporting and data. And then I'll also focus on two other sub-articles, which is elimination of discrimination in education and elimination of stereotypes in textbook syllabuses and in the media. So as we reviewed the different documents for this chapter, we analyzed periodic reports by the state parties, which countries are supposed to make, on Article 12 of the Maputo Protocol, and also looked at Article 17, the reporting on Article 17 of the African Charter. We also looked at the concluding observations issued by the African Commissions between 2012 and 2020. Maybe Celestine will explain later, if necessary, what these concluding observations are. Because in our layperson's perspective, we don't often hear about it. Things like concluding observations. But basically, when the state parties submit the reports, then the African Commission reviews them and makes comments and gives recommendations pointing out gaps and successes. And if I'm wrong, Celestine, you please correct me. So these were supplemented by data from CEDAW's, CEDAW Committee's engagement with African states. Actually, we got quite a bit of information from the CEDAW Committee, more than from the education reports. And the UNESCO's Global Education Monitoring Reports, which of course feeds into the SDG monitoring process. And then also we looked at some selected secondary research by education sector experts, and reports by even activist organizations and advocacy organizations. So our findings suggest a low prioritization of the gender equality agenda by many African governments. Yes, we've signed very many protocols and instruments, but in practice, the prioritization is low. This is reflected in inadequate investment in creating awareness on the protocol among critical stakeholders, as testified by continued invisibility of the Maputo Protocol, especially Article 12, in policy documents and national level jurisprudence. In the education sector, I do review policies from time to time. It is very rare to find the Maputo Protocol being even mentioned in the policy documents. It's missing or inadequate reporting by the states, especially on compliance with Article 12. On how they're complying to Article 12, there's hardly any reporting, and where they report it, it's inadequate. There's also non-availability of sex disaggregated data and information on its implementation in many of the state reports. And this hinders tracking of progress. I mean, how are we going to talk about progress without data, whether it's quantitative or qualitative? The examples of countries not providing sex disaggregated data include Kenya. I mean, that is down the concluding observations they point out, Namibia and South Africa. And maybe they're mentioned because they actually did some reporting of some form. Many others didn't report. Of the 17 concluding observations reviewed, only Zimbabwe got commended for compiling sex disaggregated data. Imagine, only 1 out of 17. Then there's the issue that Celestine had raised earlier, the non-adherence to the African Commission guidelines for state reporting under the protocol to the African Charter, which recommends reporting of Article 17 under the theme of equality and non-discrimination. Now, for example, Kenya, in its latest report of 2020, includes a paragraph under equality and non-discrimination. However, it does not mention it does not mention the Maputo Protocol. It references Article 17, but not the Maputo Protocol. Then the other examples that I can give is either of inadequate reporting or non-adherence is Uganda, Tanzania, Nigeria, and I know I have colleagues from Tanzania and Uganda present here. So maybe they can take note of that. Then there's also an erroneous assumption that the reporting on Article 17 in the African Charter adequately addresses education, that Article 12 under the Maputo Protocol. But it does not, because Article 17 is very broad. It does not elaborate on the right to education. Finally, the way information is communicated is activity-centered rather than results-oriented. And what that does, it also makes it very difficult to really assess, has the country as a whole made progress? So those are some of the things I hope that the next report will pay attention to. The next report, not only for Kenya, but other countries represented here, will pay attention to, because that is makes tracking of progress extremely difficult. Now, I would like to move on to the implementation, other aspects of the implementation, and that one of these is the elimination of discrimination. Now, many countries like Kenya, Malawi, Namibia, and Eritrea have legislation prohibiting discrimination in education, and this is recognized and commended, because many of the laws have been reviewed. The Kenya, the Education Act in 2013, and since then there have been policy guidelines and so on and so forth. And you have other countries doing the same. But so the main issue that arises from our analysis is not so much that the policies are not in place or the laws are not in place, but sometimes it is those aspects that is generally not talked about in the education sector specifically. We don't like to talk the language of discrimination in the education sector. So we will talk about, well, I'll mention three, but talk about two of these in terms of elimination of discrimination. One are the pregnancy policies. Then there's also discrimination against learners on the basis of school regulations, and then the issue of disabilities. I will not touch on disabilities or expound on it in this presentation because there's a whole chapter on disabilities, and also for those who are interested, a very recent report that was presented by Usawa Agenda in Kenya. I think that also, it's a gender report giving quantitative data on schools and facilities and so on, which shows that we're still very far away. I think that's a very important report that has come out, which was long, long overdue. And also another report that we, as Jaslika, with support from Jaslika researched on girls' education in East Africa, also touches on the issue of disabilities. We disseminated that with support from Raleigh in April this year, and we'll give you the links to those. So moving on to the issue of pregnancy policies, that in terms of elimination of discrimination, I think it is encouraging that at least 38 out of 54 African countries have laws and policies or measures in place that protect girls' education, right to education during pregnancy and motherhood. Countries that have repealed discriminatory laws and policies banning pregnant girls and adolescent mothers from attending school include Togo and Cameroon in 2022. Old legislation and circulars were revoked to give pregnant girls, the right to education. In Cameroon, the current policy allows pregnant girls to continue attending secondary schools and provides the option of maternity leave. It also promotes expanded access to sexual and reproductive health services and information, which is another very critical issue and barrier to girls' education. Niger in 2019 replaced a discriminatory law that excluded girls who became pregnant and permanently expelled married students from school with a policy that explicitly protects the right to education. In its amended Education Act of 2020, Zimbabwe prohibited the expulsion of pregnant girls from school. And in Uganda and Kenya, policies and guidelines have been put in place between 2016 to 2020 that facilitates the re-entry of girls and lactating mothers in school, which includes Burundi. It also includes Burundi. We are going to upload a blog post soon written by one of our youth members, that's 15 minutes, by one of my our youth members who has critically looked at the re-entry policy guidelines to see what are the implementation gaps. So we will alert those of you who are interested. And then to move on quickly, despite this positive actions, challenges persist. For example, the stigma persists. The right to return is not guaranteed, but remains conditional. For example, the mandatory withdrawal from school during pregnancy or after delivery, restrictions barring girls from taking national exams, lack of provision for supplementary exams for girls who cannot attend do the exams, and consignment to alternative education spaces of lower quality. And I think that last one is an example from Equatorial New Guinea, where it shows how girls who can't afford it cannot return because of very limited services. And I'll add to this, the CEDAW committees notes the absence of information on the assessment of impact. Yes, the 38 or is it 34 countries that have laws and policies in place, but what is the impact? Who has assessed the impact? So that's a huge gap that one needs to look at, including in Kenya. And then we also talk about the role of courts. The exclusion of pregnant schoolgirls has been deliberated in both the African Court and the African Children's Committee. I don't have time.
I will give you just 3 more minutes so that you can wind up. Otherwise, you've exceeded the 20 minutes.
Now, 18 minutes. I timed myself at 15 minutes. So anyway, so I will not go into details on that because of the time, but just to say that in terms of the courts, the African Court and the ECOWAS Court, they have been generally positive. They have been positive to and supported the right of the pregnant girl to return to school. And Tanzania is a well-known case. And then there's the issue of discrimination in school dress codes. In Kenya and other countries, you have the issue of the hijab. It has been very contentious. And also the issue of the hairstyles, the dreadlocks, and the afro hair and braids. Those have been clashes with schools, because school authorities say that it violates the school regulations. So the issue then arises, what is greater, the right of the child to education or the school regulations, which seem to have a very narrow perspective of what uniform or equality means, because sometimes, and here the rulings from the domestic courts have been more contentious and not uniform. So then very quickly, I will just go to the issue of elimination of stereotypes. And of course, the dress code and hairstyle restrictions also is reflective of stereotyped biases on that intersecting biases of race, religion, and gender, resulting in intersectional discrimination. But the CEDAW committee also expresses concerns at the inadequacy of measures put in place for the elimination of stereotypes, citing Eswatini, Ethiopia, Gabon, Rwanda, South Africa, and Uganda. It flags stereotypical attitudes reflected in biased subject selection by girls at secondary, resulting in low enrollment in STEM courses, which is quite well known. And then the Gender Report of 2020 also confirms the persistence of stereotypes in school textbooks. In conclusion, I would like to say that I would like to underscore the need for the African Commission to be more proactive in the engagement with the states, to deepen the conversations, to go beyond inquiring from states whether they have the necessary policies and guidelines in place to how these policies and guidelines take account of a diverse range of exclusions, including those that may be presumed neutral or inevitable, as the cases described here illustrate. African regional human rights bodies have the opportunity to contribute to the relevant jurisprudence on ensuring that the environment in educational institutions is conducive for girls and affirming their identities, especially girls from minority communities. States also have an obligation to ensure alignment of specific laws, subsidiary legislation, regulations, and directives in education and associated policies to constitutional standards of equality, and state organs like the National Gender and Equality Commission of Kenya that have the mandate to monitor compliance must also ensure that they report on Article 12 of the Maputo Protocol, adhering to the recommended guidelines. And I would also like to finish by saying there's a disconnect between the women's movement and the girls and the education sector. I think we need to bridge the gap between the education sector and the women's rights movement, because we have the same goals, but we don't seem to be working together. So I will just end there, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Dr. Shi. That was a great analysis of what the commentary entailed regarding Article 12, the right to education. Because of time, if there's any comments, pressing comments and questions, please remember that you can put your comments or questions on the chat and we'll be able to discuss them or ask them to the panelists after the presentation. We'll go to our third presenter for today, and it's Ms. Yasmin Mohammed, who's a feminist and also works at Superb CBO. So she's going to give us a more personal perspective from the grassroots level.
Okay. Thank you very much, Esther. And also the session has been really informative from the previous speakers, Dr. Celestine and Dr. Sheila. Thank you very much. So once again, my name is Yasmin, and I run a feminist grassroots organization in the informal settlement of Kibera here in Nairobi, Kenya. And what we basically do is to champion and advocate for increased enjoyment of human rights by women and girls in all their diversity. And as an organization, we've been in the forefront in ensuring that women and girls in all their diversities are fully empowered so that they'll be able to realize their highest potential. And it is through different avenues. And what prompted me to start off the organization is based on my lived realities, or rather lived experiences. So I come from one of the most marginalized communities here in Kenya, which is the Nubian community. And the Nubian community are considered to be one of the minority groups. And again, based on the history, we were brought over like 100 years ago from Sudan by British and have been treated as foreigners ever since. And just to give, in a nutshell, the history of the Nubian community, because it aligns with whatever I'll be speaking about, because of our ethnic and religious origins, we are being discriminated and forced to go through a very lengthy and humiliating process in order to obtain identification or rather documentation, which is very essential for you to obtain recognition of the Kenyan citizenship, which is again contrary to Article 3 and Article 6 of the African Charter on the Welfare and Well-being of the Child. So this lack of effective access to citizenship has left many Nubian community with a second-class status, and also making them to not be able to access resources such as education. And the government of Kenya also has discriminated the Nubian community by refusing to provide access to utilities or public service. Because again, if today you need to go and access government service, let's say in a nearby sub-county, then you'll be asked to present an identification, or rather if you are under 18, you'll be asked to come with a birth certificate, which is something that you don't have. So arguing that Nubians are squatters and that we are not like Kenyan citizens. So those Nubians, again, who are unable to obtain recognition of the Kenyan citizenship are left stateless, which is a situation prohibited in the international law. So the long history of discrimination with regards to Kenyan Nubian citizenship and property, or rather other rights, has led to our marginalization, which is perpetuated by the government's failure to provide equal access to opportunities, again, and resources, such as education. And based on that, you find that if today you don't have access to, or rather you don't have a birth certificate, then it will be extremely hard for you to even enroll to school, because some of the documents that are required for someone to join or to join even kindergarten is a birth certificate. And today, if you don't have that particular document, it will be very, very hard for you to access such kind of government services. And making us or that particular child to be left behind in terms of education, among other so many opportunities. And then when it comes to identification, let's say today you have a birth certificate, then you are supposed now to go to apply, like you are 18 years, and after the lengthy and humiliating process your parents had gone through, you end up getting the the birth certificate. Then it comes now the identification part. For someone to get that particular document, it's again another story. And for some of the Nubians who have been able to access identification, they've also undergone through a very lengthy and that humiliating. It's a very tedious process, which I must say that it has left some of the people from my community not to even go for it, because it's really humiliating. You going to Nyayo House, you going to the sub-county's office, and then you're being called names like you are not Kenyans, you know. So some of these things have really left majority of the Nubian communities without identification. And remember, even today, if you are joining school or you're enrolling to universities, to colleges, you need to present an identification or a registration to show who you are. So it is extremely hard for people or children from a community to even enroll to school, because it's something that really it is a requirement. And the government of Kenya has failed this particular community and making us again to be one of the most marginalized communities here in Kenya. And based on that small history of where I'm coming from, now my lived experience made me start off an organization called Superb. Based on how we are being considered, or rather based on how we are the lengthy process of acquiring identification, registration, and how women and girls from the Nubian communities are being left behind in terms of opportunities and government services, made me to start off an initiative that is called SUPAB, which is a grassroots feminist organization here in Kibera that champions and advocates for increased enjoyment of human rights by women and girls in all their diversities, meaning that we are trying as much as we can to challenge discriminatory laws that are not inclusive, laws that continues to infringe or violates the rights of women and girls in all in different diversities. And as an organization, we work towards different thematic areas that is sexual and reproductive health and rights. We also work on matters to do with feminist leadership and development. We work on economic empowerment and livelihood. We also work on climate justice and, above everything, advocacy. And education is one of the most strategic focus that we are working towards as well as an organization, because at SUPAB we noted that due to lack of documentation and identification, you find that majority of children from my community are not in a position to go to school, which again is contrary to Article 12 of the Maputo Protocol, which guarantees children or girl child the girl child access to education and among other learning institutions. So you find with the fact that these children don't get these opportunities of going to school, we had to start off doing something. And again, advocacy is something that we've centered in all our interventions and approaches as an organization. And we started working with an organization called Nubian Rights Forum, which is an organization that pushes for the government of Kenya to facilitate smooth process in ensuring that Nubian community get access to registration, such as the birth certificate, as well as identification, which again is a process that is gradually taking effect, because as we speak today, we have some of the Nubian communities who have access to this particular document and have been able to go and access, to go and register or enroll to school. So as an organization, again at SUPAB, we ensure that we challenge some of the harmful practices, which again limits girls from going to school. Practices like child marriage, because in my community is something that happens a lot, coming from being a Muslim, again coming from this ethnic community, a marginalized community. It's something that happens frequently, and you find that when a girl reaches puberty, they sees you as someone who is now ready for marriage, you know. And it's something that, again, violates your right, because you are supposed to make your own decision as a person, or rather as a human being. You're entitled to making your own decision and decide whom and what you want to be in terms of realizing your full potential. So child marriage is something that it's also, it happens most of the time in my community, which makes most of the girls not to continue with their education. Then looking at female genital mutilation, also it's something that was used to, like, it used to be practiced in my community, and you find the previous generation of my community had undergone female genital mutilation or cutting, which again made most of the women not to go to school, which is something that again needs to be addressed, because even now FGM is something that is being facilitated or procured, but again, behind the scenes or behind the curtain. So looking at even how the government of Kenya made FGM something that is punishable. So you find other people, not only from my community, but also other communities like the Maasai community, Borana community, still facilitate FGM. But again, it's something that also as an organization, we are working tirelessly in ensuring that it comes to an end completely, so that these girls will be able to go to school and be retained in school. Then another thing Madam Sheila also spoke about was in regards to the dress code. I come, like, as you can see how I've presented myself, I have my hijab on, which as a Muslim girl, this is how we are supposed to like wear. But again, when you go to some institutions, or rather when you've been enrolled to some institutions, you're being told that now you're not supposed to put on your hijab, which again, it's something that is against our religion and culture, you know. So it's something that while formulating some of these policies, the educational policies, then there is need to ensure that they are as inclusive as possible and it accommodates all girls, regardless from where you are coming from. Then another thing I'd also love to talk about is in regards to the actions that we are taking at the organization in ensuring that we challenge some of these socio-cultural norms as well as the gender stereotypes around girl-child and also the intersectional, the nexus between education and also girls from the marginalized communities. So as an organization, what we've been doing advocacy and holding different duty bearers, or rather policymakers, accountable in ensuring that for the policies that they are formulating, they should be non-discriminatory, they should be as inclusive as possible. And I'm happy to say that today, for those Nubians who are registering for, let's say, birth certificate and also identification, they are going through the process is so smooth as compared to how it was before, and it's because of our advocacy efforts at the organization. So what do I mean? What I mean is that you find that if today you have an identification, then it will be much easier for you to enroll to school or even to take your kid to kindergarten and ensuring that you retain them in school. Then again, as an organization, we have been able to open a community library. So that community library was informed by the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. Because during the COVID-19 pandemic, and again, during crisis or pandemic period, you find that there is lack of access to learning materials because one, it's either schools will be closed because of such kind of crisis. And even recently we had flooding. Schools had to be closed because of that. So as an organization, what we did was ensuring that we have a community library, number one. The library was giving access to learning materials because coming from the Kibera community, a community whereby a majority of its population are being considered to be coming from a humble background, who lives under $1, or rather are casual laborers. They whatever income they get, it's from hand to mouth. So you find even their children don't have enough learning materials like textbooks, and even getting access to these particular materials, it's very hard because for the schools which are based in Kibera, it has so many children in it, whereby a child will be forced to, like, you'll have to share a textbook. Let's say if today Yasmin will go with a textbook, tomorrow the other person will go with a textbook. And that is why, as an organization, we decided to open up a community library whereby these girls, the children who are coming from my community, will be in a position to have access to learning materials. In that, if you've been given homework, you'll not have to go to the house of so-and-so. You wait for them to finish the homework because the book has been provided by the government. Then you take the book. Again, because of insecurities issues, we had to come up with that approach. So you just come to the organization, we give you the book, you write off, then when you're done, you return the book so that another child or another girl will be in a position to use it. Then another thing was we had the community library so that we do additional resources for these girls when it comes to education. Because again, during COVID-19 pandemic, because that is what informed our intervention, during the COVID-19 pandemic, you find that learning had to shift from the physical mode of learning to online learning. And as a result, you find, again, majority of children and also rather girl child from my community coming from a poor background, they were not in a position to facilitate things like gadgets, things like laptops. So you find with that library, we had gadgets that facilitated these girls with learning material, you know. So whenever you've been told that you'll be having online classes, at least you'll be in a position to come to the office and collect a gadget. Then you go back at home so that you continue like studying, or rather if you're having any online classes, you'll be in a position to join because now you have access to a learning material like the gadgets. Then again, another thing that prompted our intervention for having a community library was the home setup. So in the informal settlement of Kibera, you find that a household, like they only live in a one room facility, whereby that one room, it's the kitchen, it's the sitting room, it's the bedroom, like it's everything, that one room. So you find that with that, it's very, very hard for someone to learn in such kind of an environment. The home setup, it's really hard for them to learn in such kind of an environment, making them the distractions are too much. And it again affects their performance at school, because we are not only looking at right to education, we're looking at right to education, retention of these children, and also performance. As far as I know. And with the home setup, it also made us, or rather informed us, to now having a space at the office whereby when you come, you can also take your time and read, and it's a safe space. So you can read. When you are done, you can go back to at home. So having said that, you find that as an organization, with the provision of that community library, the online gadgets, and also at least bringing in additional resources, it has enabled our girls to perform well in school. And also for those who are not in school, because even at Superb, we had girls who are not in school. Like a girl was in Form 1, and because of some financial constraints from the parent, they had to drop out of school. So that forced us, again, with the resources that we had at the library, at least the girls used to come and acquire some of the materials that we had and continued with their learnings. And it's because of with the effect of the financial or economic constraints the parent used to experience. So you find with the school dropout, again, looking at the stories of teen pregnancies and school re-entry, because I also wanted to talk about school dropouts and school re-entry policy. You find that we do have a girl who dropped out of school because of one, financial constraints and lack of school fees, who comes to the office so that they'll have that that space, a conducive space for learning. Then we have another girl who transacted sex for pads, because again, with where we are coming from, you find transactional sex is something that usually occurs in a day-to-day basis because of the vulnerability or in terms of livelihood. So girls, upon reaching puberty, when they've started off their menses and the family is not in a position to buy menstrual products, they opt for alternative ways, which some are very, very unsafe and health hazardous, and some usually opt for alternatives like transactional sex. So for those who goes that way, some of them ends up getting pregnant, and when they get pregnant, they drop out of school, which is a situation, again, that has lots and lots of ripple effects from dropping out of school. One might be infected with the HIV. Then again, you'll be adding another burden. If you had 4 mouths to feed, then you'll have 5 now. So you find this girl, when she wants to go back to school.
Jasmine, the time is already up, so let me add you 1 to 2 minutes to
Yes, please do, please. Yeah. Okay, so you find when this adolescent girl wants to go back to school because of, let's say, teen pregnancy, it's yes, we do have a school reentry policy in Kenya, but it's not being implemented effectively. Because today, when someone wants to go to school and then the teacher starts to like in one or the other intimidate that particular girl and calling her names like mama, quote unquote, you like in terms of behavior, we don't want to influence the other kids so that they end up getting pregnant. So the girl gets intimidated and like doesn't want to go to school anymore. So as an organization, we also work with schools which are in Kibera. And what we do is we increase public awareness and try to convene, bringing the teachers together so that we have a conversation with them around teenage pregnancies and the reintegration or re-entry of these adolescents back to school, and the reception also of these girls back in school. So as an organization, those are some of the interventions that we are doing as far as right to education is concerned. And we are not only looking at right to education, we're also ensuring that these girls are retained in schools, and also we are tracking their performance, because and also when we are tracking their performance, we also, since we are a women's rights organization, we're also working on demystifying some of the gender stereotypes and making girls to know that maths and science, technology, engineering are courses that they can also take, and just trying to disrupt the patriarchal system that do exist in the learning institutions, making them know that it's possible for them to like take up STEM courses. It's possible for them to perform, to be number ones in schools. And in a nutshell, I know my time is up, but that's what we do at the organization, and I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to unpacking more if time will allow. Thank you. Back to you, Esther and Irene.
Thank you so much, Yasmin, for that. That was so inspiring, and we are glad that you founded Superb, that is able to actually come to the aid of the marginalized community, especially women. And I know you're a proud feminist. I can see it on your Twitter space, on your Twitter handle. So that's really encouraging to see. I can see the comment section, people are chatting up. Meringina is saying encouraging work from Superb. We can see Professor Grace is saying the interventions by Yasmin is describing commendable work, especially the library part. So that's really good to hear. The next presenter, our last panelist, is going to be Dr. Purity Ngina, the CEO of the National Gender Inequality Commission of Kenya. I'm hoping she's still here. Karibu, Dr. Purity. She's going to present
Can I go on?
Yes, kindly. Karibu.
Thanks. When you're coming after such a powerful presentation, someone saying I can't share screen. I hope I'll be able to share. And the issues that have been raised, that really are at the heart of the commission in terms of if someone, I don't know why I'm not able to share my screen.
Can you see the share screen?
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
No, we cannot be able
Not,
to.
not yet. But try again.
Okay.
Otherwise, if it's not going through, you can send an email to Dr. Sheila or myself, and we'll be able to project it for you. But you have the rights to share.
Yeah, I had, I don't know, it's when it says I'm not allowed to share.
Not a problem. Just email it to me. As you introduce yourself, we'll try and get it set up for you. Otherwise, Ali, you can check the technological challenges.
I would be surprised that since COVID, we are still having issues,
No worries.
Sort as, but it just tells me I'm not able to share.
Okay,
And
just email.
okay.
In the meantime, you can introduce
Yes,
yourself
yes. I've
because
sent
we didn't get to
to
know.
to
Yes.
Dr. Sheila.
Yes.
But thanks again for allowing me to join. My name is Dr. Ngina Purity from National Gender and Equality Commission. I am a person who believes in equality and inclusion, but also now heading a commission that promotes equality and inclusion. Before then, I was in the education space for many years. Hence, now this Article 12 is close to my heart because of the many disparities that we have observed in the field in terms of learning outcomes, things that probably should be making us angry when you find children who are not able to read and they are probably in grade 6, then it makes you feel sad because we know what reading means to a child. If you reflect what probably has made you to be on this forum is the fact that you can read. Not even the fact that you went to uni, became a professor. I think the basic one is that you're able to read, and hence I'm very happy to have joined all of you to discuss some of the issues that we have observed or what we are doing at the National Gender and Equality Commission. National Gender and Equality Commission is a constitutional commission established through an act of parliament of 2011. So we just celebrated our 13th year on 30th of August since the enactment of that act pursuant to Article 59, 4 and 5 of the Kenya Constitution. So we are among many other constitutional commissions, and our role in the Act is to promote equality and inclusion, focusing on 6 special interest groups. This we are talking about women, children, youth, persons with disability, minority and marginalized, and the older members of the society. I don't know whether we are able to now put the presentation. And
Sheila? Dr. Sheila Omahio, do we have it now?
Yes, I've just seen it. We're trying to upload.
Yeah. Okay, so it will be up in a minute, Dr.
Yeah,
Gideon.
so our role really is to ensure that all those people are represented in the decision making, but they also access justice. So we are given 16 mandates through the Act, and we have tried to put those mandates in 5 thematic areas within our strategic plan. One is compliance, reporting, and documentation. So we are given mandate through the Constitution to be the only state organ that is supposed to check, to audit compliance to the principles of equality and inclusion for both national and international, conventions and treaties. So we collect data from ministries. Thank you, Dr. Sheila. We collect data from the ministry, departments and agencies on how they are complying with the two-third gender principles, which they are required to report on. But also we report on these other treaties that the country has ratified. We also do investigations if there are cases where rights of individuals have been, anything has been done, taken advantage of. We are able to investigate, but we are given quasi-judicial powers and also offer redress. And if we are not able to, depending on the issue of the matter, we have the court user committees where we get to refer those members to ensure they access justice. So access to justice is very critical. We do public education and mainstreaming, talking about, and this is also within the Act, how do we promote culture of equality? So we are required by the Act to carry out public education to promote the culture of equality and inclusion. We also conduct research, and this again is also within the Act that NGCs can conduct, can coordinate So either we can conduct or coordinate researchers, and their goal is to come up with a database, which again is within the Act, and institutional capacity strengthening. So any institution that probably are struggling with what is this gender mainstreaming, or what are the principles of equality, we give that capacity. Our officers are able to go to support any institution, government and not governments, because this commission is supposed to serve every member of the society. So I had mentioned about the 6 interest groups. So the next so what would I say we have achieved? Of course, producing outputs, position paper and reports from 8 treaties and conventions. You know, we are now given an affiliate status, which is something to celebrate with us. Hence, we can really talk about issues of human rights from that front. We were able to check compliance for 389 MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies. And you can see I put the data out there that 37 of these only have women in the leadership. And we are not talking about the top leadership. It's from certain job group where you then think that these people are in the top management. And in the whole task workforce, we only have 1.6% persons with disability. We have reviewed complaints. We supported this community, you know, to be recognized, and so issues to do with minority and marginalized. And I know there are many communities that still have not received their status. Hence, this is something that the Commission is able to follow, to support, and to give even legal aids to different communities. Of course, we have conducted analysis in terms of research. It's okay, Dr. Sheila. The next is our mandate in relation to the Maputo. Of course, as I mentioned, is the issue of compliance. And so for compliance, then Maputo is one of them. And what have we done so far? Is formulated the localized Maputo Protocol implementation scorecards. I just put a picture of that scorecard on the next slide. Hence, now you will be able to have a contextualized way of monitoring, because I think there's a bit of gap in terms of how do we monitor, how do we do a unified monitoring process, maybe as East African, where are we? As a country, I think there is a bit of work to be done. And so it is good that now as a country, we are able to have that document. So of course, when you look at indicator 1, is talks about the country taking appropriate measures to eliminate discrimination. And of course, this is also in our constitution. Article 53 of the Constitution guarantee every child free and compulsory basic education. So the policies are there. When you think about 100% transition, I don't know whether we should be calling it a policy, a guideline of, you know, it's a guarantee that every child needs to progress to the next level. And of course, one of the confrontation that then you get with this is where the starting statement where I said a child in grade 6 is not able to read, but then someone will ask you, but they were not given an opportunity to stay in a grade where they could have actually probably acquired basic reading skills. And so sometimes when you're having these conversations, we appreciate that there are also those pushback, that the policy is there, but there will always be something happening somewhere else that will help you now start thinking. And I think when I am faced with such question, I find those as learning moments where researchers need to sit together and put all these policies on the table and ask ourselves, how do they complement each other? Is there a policy that really would be inhibiting the success of the other policy? So of course, we have the acts, Basic Education Acts, and Dr. Sheila. Yes, so this is just the continuation of what have we done as a country. School reentry guidelines. Could the conversation be, can they now move to a policy level where there are measures? Because if you are facing the issue Yasmin mentioned about a girl going back and they are facing those stigmas, and so the question was, where do they go to report? What are the provisions within the law? And of course, when you look at school reentry, then you go to the Ministry of Health, where then you're supposed to have the lactation guidelines working together, because the environment has to be very conducive for these young mothers, child mothers, to be able to, you know, to support their children, because we all know about the 1,000 days that helps in terms of cognitive development. If the cognitive is not well developed, probably that is why we have these issues of children in school and probably not learning. We have the mentorship policy for early learning, which of course is also very good in terms of, you know, having role model, promoting retention. We have guidance and counseling, and I even know most schools, if not all, have the safe space where if a learner is feeling, you know, tired, the mind is not well that day, they can just go and sit and recover, which I think is a progressive way where the school also provide an environment that would ensure our mental stability for our children. We have the model gender mainstreaming policy for TVET. This one was actually done by the National Gender Inequality Commission, and hence all the TVETs can now just borrow, adopt or adapt the model policy. It is a published document, and hence it removes this work of you don't have resources to develop a policy on gender, because there's already one, and you'll just be required to adapt or adopt. But what are the achievements after all doing all this? What can the country be proud of? I think we have seen kind of increase in enrollment to 8.2%, which I think is positive. And the question then is, what are they doing when they join the school? I think for me, that is something to always remember. People are getting scholarship, and you can see that this, especially Elimu scholarship, girls have been targeted. We have mobile schools in the arid and semi-arid areas in Wajir. We have meals, which would then boost retention. Sanitary towels, around 790 million actually was spent last financial year to support this. And then we have the Kenya Primary Education Equity in Learning Program. I can see professors wrote something, and so my brain went to first read. But yeah, so this issue of primary education equity and learning program, I know most of you have seen it. Scholarships, their teachers are being trained. And of course, I know as a researcher, then you ask yourself, is the cascade model working for us? Especially when you interact a lot with the curriculum. So there are still some teething problems, but I think as a country, then we can be proud of the successes we have made. And you can see the enrollment supported by the policy of transition. That would explain why we have now Form 1 increase of 14.1%. But what are the hidden things, the hidden story? I think sometimes when you talk about success and all that, I have put three different stories. One is the challenges that girls continue to face. So according to KDHS, you can see that 15% of the girls are still going through FGM. And the thing about FGM is the moment girls go through it, then they stop going to school because you have now matured to become a parent. And I think for me, that is the issue. Because, I mean, I think the way the communities, and I think Yasmin mentioned that there are still communities doing it. You can see it is still at 15%. Hence, those are girls who will probably never go back to school. And there are many other issues about FGM. One, education being one, you know, the problems and the challenge of it. Then we have 15% of girls are subjected to child pregnancy. Allow me to call it child pregnancy, because before you become 18 years, you're still a child. And hence this, then we need to interrogate that return to school. How can it work for this 15%? Then we have 23 of the girls are married before the age of 18. And if they're married, that would explain then they will still get children. And I know one of the confrontation then you face is what support do these children get from, they are already married, which should be illegal. But anyway, it has happened. They are not able to go to school because the environment is not favorable to them, because there are no lactation place, or they don't have anyone to take care of their children. So even when we think about other programs, other better bottom-up economic transformation of cash transfer, maybe these are some of the areas where, as people who are in this space, we need to be talking about that. Even these girls who go back to school, they have left their children with their parents. So these parents probably deserve to be given something so that they are able to accommodate, to help this child. Also, because we know the first 6 months, the child is supposed to be exclusively breastfed. And the exam cycle. So there are many issues there, especially like now where we are coming to the end of 844 grade. You know, there are many questions one has to ask about. You not have an opportunity to sit for that exam again. Probably you are not able to go to school because the time of the exam you getting the child. You know, there are many things that we need to think about and provide provisions that would be favorable for these girls, so that being a young mother or being a child mother doesn't become a lifetime discrimination that will affect you and your generations to come. Of course, the last thing is that 65% of women are facing harassment in public spaces. I think these women and girls, and when most of us, if you live in Nairobi, you see those yellow buses. Those buses have girls also and boys. So then the 65% is also talking about children who are going to school facing harassment. And we need to think about how do we make this space safe. But the other most important thing is the percentage of schools with following laboratories by gender. So if you look at that space, you can see that boys' school are having it all better. And I like speaking with data because it tells a story. And hence, when you look at the end of year exam, and I think the next slide probably, I don't know whether it's the next slide, but this has an implication. You can just stay there, Dr. Sheila, but this has an implication on how girls perform in sciences. And if you look at the country projection, is that 60% of our jobs will be coming to STEM-related careers. And that is why the CBC project that 60% of the children should go to STEM, so that 25 goes to social sciences and 15 goes to the talents and academies and all that. If then the girls did not perform well in sciences, like we saw in 2023, that the girls performed only in English, Kiswahili, arts and design, 5 subjects, and boys performed very well in other. It looks like the system design where you can see this kind of this. Of course, then if you move even to the higher level, where the universities should be at the forefront of appreciating equality, because they are in the education space and the apex of it all. But you can see the numbers still that in the council, we have a male domination in it, which then when you see this in the highest level of the people who everybody is looking up to, it makes issues of equality become even very harder in the villages where probably the illiteracy level is high. So I think we need as a country to shift and to change and to appreciate that every person, because if and I brought this as university because we are talking about education. We could move to the next slide, Dr. Sheila, which of course is still the same story. If you look at this data, you might make an assumption that because in 2023, 39,455 girls got the quality grades, which is higher than that of boys, and you can look at the pattern, you might make an assumption that we have reached gender parity. But then it is important for us to go deeper, and you can see that female candidates recorded better mean score performance than male in English, Kiswahili, science, CRE, home science, and art and design. And if you look back to what I had said, that 60% of our jobs are going to be in STEM courses, and we are investing a lot. I'm sure in every of your constituency, these activates somewhere, and the government is putting a lot of money. But then who is going to benefit is a person who did the courses that aligns to those TVET subjects, and this then remain with the male. And so as we move to just look at, we should not look at gender parity as numbers and say, because now we have 50% girls in school, 50% boys in school, we have arrived. We have a long way to go, and that is why it is important for us to disaggregate data, but also to go deeper into that data, because unless you read these two documents or these two statistics together, there is no way you're going to bring out the issue. Because if someone read the first document without the female candidates, then you'll say, oh my goodness, girls did well in 2023. But then you have to look at what did they do well in, where will it take them, you know, and this is a pattern you'll even see when you go to teaching profession. You know, there are many injustices, as someone has called them, or systemic issues that we must deal with. And so it was important for me to bring out the hidden stories, so that as researchers, people we are speaking about this, we are not lost. We don't lose the focus. And I'm not saying that the issues of boys should not be addressed. I know there are many issues, and Commission has actually done a perception study on what about boys. We are very concerned, including ourselves, but then data should always be very informing, and we should make policies that are well informed by data. So what we must do, I don't know whether is the right thing to do, to say what we must do. What I think is very important for me is research, and I just picked this. This is within the mandate of the Commission: conduct and coordinate research activities. And why I say this is important is that sometimes, and I remember, let me give you a story. Recently, we went for a meeting and Dr. Sheila was presenting. This could be in March, on girl education. And she asked us a question. Do you think there are many girls, female students in the university? And we were all gender researchers. We were all feminists in that room. But guess our answer. I know one day, Dr. Sheila, you need to share the statistics of the respondents. We all said yes. We all said yes, because we have not gone deeper to collect data. We are just listening to stories. Because right now, if you listen to what people will say, then you'll assume that we are now okay. I believe there's room for collecting more data, for data categorization, so that we're able to tell the story of where are these girls, where are these boys, what are they doing, so that even in the university or after basic education, we are able to project better as a country. Because if the statistics I've given is maintained, it means that 10 years from now, I'll still be attending a conference invited by engineers and saying we don't have female engineers. I'll still be talking about there are no girls taking mathematics or STEM courses. And that is because research, we still don't have enough data, or we are not speaking the same. So if I sit together in a meeting with Dr. Sheila, do we have the same, are we informed by the same data? because we probably will be talking about the same population. And you'll find sometimes when we speak, then we have different kind of data. And for me, then I think, how can the National Gender and Equality Commission be that person who coordinates different players who are conducting research, whether it is in education, whether it is in health, whether it is in green energy, which is climate change and all that. And then we play the bigger, we are able now not to just check compliance, but we'll come back and say, but the data is saying this. There are pockets where this has been achieved. Can we go and document what worked there and put it in a way that everybody can have it to learn? So of course, we also, within our mandates, we can develop a database where people then, as I said, it is just a click and you're able to see what are we talking about gender-based violence, what are we talking about education in terms of equality, giving it an equality and inclusion lens. And I think for me, I can't underscore the importance of research, because probably is because I'm coming from a research background, but I believe research plays a very important role. And research is not just collecting data, it's where pilots are happening of someone implementing, and I'm going there to learn what they are saying, and I'm advising government based on some of those things that I would see they are working in different spaces. So I think that is why for me, I would still bring out this aspect of research. I believe policies are there. The implementation is the issue, and the intentionality to implement those policies. If we have the Constitution already declaring that every child has the right to education, but we still see our children are not accessing quality education, and hence it's a big problem. The supreme law, even before you go to certain different provisions within the other policies and guidelines, we have the supreme law, which is a constitution. Article 53 is very clear about even safety of children, but we still have those challenges coming to on our face. I think that would be my last. Is it so? I am not so sure, but I believe that for me was a main thing. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Purity, for that. That was a wholesome presentation. And I think you clearly brought out the importance of research and data in informing policies regarding girls, whether it's gender education. I think we can go to the comment section. I'm seeing Anne Obura is saying that research evidence is there. The updating continues to stand us, but strategic action has to change in nature. The National Gender and Equality Commission can lead us. We can see that Rosa Muranguri is saying, well done, Sheila. Dr. Naomi Ondicho is saying that was a powerful presentation from Dr. Celestine. So we continue to get the comment section. Semerian Sankori is saying very informative session. Thank you, Dr. Sheila. Hamisa Mboga is saying very informative presentation from the speakers. We have Grace Mwamba, great work, Yasmin, so commendable. Dorcas Asiago is saying kudos to Yasmin and her foundation. I think we can go to questions now. I wanted to touch on something that there's something someone mentioned, Nyakwea. I'm trying to find her name. Nyakwea Wai. She was talking about wanting to learn more about the right to protect women and girls during pregnancy. And I think Dr. Purity has given us a good outlook on what the Commission is doing, and there's need for more provisions to protect the girls going back to school, because re-entry requires a lot more. Childcare is fundamental for the concentration of girls back to school. I think Dorcas Asiago is saying, I totally concur with Dr. Ngina. At TVET level, female students shy away from technical courses, e.g. engineering courses. And I think someone also mentioned that we need to write the structural, historical, gender perspectives for women so that they are more, we encourage them more to take STEM subjects. So I think I'll pass over the mic to the moderator, Dr. Irene, for the questions, for the first question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. The panelists have done a wonderful, wonderful job of really examining Article 12 in its various dimensions and it's in the different scopes, you know, at the regional level, at the national level, at the community level, and at the policy level. So I want to really, really thank each one of them. And also the audience, which has been very, very engaged in terms of sending comments and sending questions. And now I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping because on our schedule, we expected to run from 5:30 to 7:30. We started a few minutes late. I think it was 5:45. And it's now heading to 7:45. So what I want to do is to request your indulgence for the next 20 minutes, so we finish at 8, so that we can allow some interactions between the audience or participant and the panelists. As moderators, we will basically reserve our questions and go straight to the questions that the participants have raised. I'll try and pick out the most salient ones that each panelist can then handle. And I think one of the questions that I really, really would like to see addressed is, for example, there's this question from Anna Obura. She raises two questions, which are mainly going to Yasmin. The first one is about, let me just read it actually, so that I don't paraphrase. She of course notes there's the disconnect. My view would be fundamental revival of conceptualizing girls' education for today, which would transform girls' education into an aspirational endeavor, supportive and reviewing how much goals may encompass the interest of boys. So I think the challenge that she's raising actually goes to Sheila. Why are we having this disconnect between girls' education and, of course, the whole movement around women's rights, particularly because there would be some continuity in the sense of access to opportunities and education and training. And of course, if you want to look at it on a broader base, literacy for girls and women, which would then open other opportunities and allow for realization of an enjoyment of other rights as well. So, and I think in your book, you've talked about the 3 different ways in which rights are important. So maybe Sheila, you could very quickly tackle that question, and then I will move to the other 2 questions about the National Council for Nomadic Education in Kenya and the need for this alliance between communities and solidarity, so that when there is a minority community that is excluded, then we can start to work together for justice, which would be Yasmin's question. I'll go back to them again, but Sheila, the solidarity and the need for solidarity and the current disconnect between girls' education and the women's rights movement.
Sorry, Irene, I think there was a problem on the internet. I didn't hear the first part of your question. I can't hear you.
Irene, you're muted.
I'm saying it's the question that was raised by Dr. Anobura about the disconnect between girls' education and the women's rights movement. when there is so much synergy between the two, why do we see that disconnect, and what can we do to try and bridge that gap?
Okay, I think I think basically the education sector has evolved in a way to think of schools and enrollment, you know, that issue that of access, but without really scrutinizing the underlying, the root causes of why children are not learning, which Dr. Gina raised, that there is a transition from the automatic transition, but the children are not learning. So that takes us back to the issue of quality. But when we're talking about quality education, the mainstream education sector does not put equality at the heart of that quality. And I think that's a big problem. So even the perspectives we come from, you look at many, not all, even university research thesis and so on, they will not look at underlying factors. Like, for example, what Yasmin was talking about, the patriarchy. They won't talk about that, but they'll talk about it at a superficial level, and they won't look at it at an intersection level. So I think it's the different perspectives that we are coming from and the way we have been trained in the two sectors. So in brief, you know, I can go on for a long time, but I want to be brief. I think I will just say that it seems to be, we are going maybe parallel at best, or even in opposite.
So it seems that there is some work for us to do, especially those who are in advocacy and in research. I want to quickly pass the baton to Yasmin to tell us if Superb CBO is in any way intersecting with the National Council for Nomadic Education in Kenya, and if there is an opportunity to harness solidarity between communities in order to protect the interests of the marginalized communities. And I think, Dr. Musembi, you can also chime in here about the rights of minority communities in Kenya and solidarity in terms of claiming inclusion and justice, social justice. Because you've done some work around housing, but this is anything you can tell us about education. Thank you. Yasmin, and then Dr. Celestine.
Thank you very much for that question regarding if we are into the National Council for Nomadic Pastoralists, if I got that right. No, we are not into that. However, as an organization, we've been able to sit into different concerned and technical working groups, which again brings in the component of synergies. So we are open to collaborate and to foster partnerships with like-minded organizations, which their strategic focus or thematic areas aligns with ours. And that is why we are engaging with schools at in Kibera, and also through support from the sub-county office or administration, we've been able to been engaged to matters concerning the education of a girl child in our constituency. Because today, if a girl doesn't go to school because of, let's say, things like sanitary towel, you'll see the DCC or the area chief calling the organization so that we'll be able to facilitate menstrual products so that this girl will be able to keep this girl in school. So matters to do with collaboration, we've been able to do that. However, as an organization, we are in the front line in doing advocacy. So we are working on ensuring that the government allocate enough resources so that girls from the marginalized and minority groups will be able to be admitted and enrolled in schools, and also issuance of birth certificates and identification be facilitated smoothly. So our advocacy effort is geared towards that, so that we'll be able to realize the right to education. And if we do that, we'll be able to also actualize gender equality and women empowerment for all. Thank you.
Jasmine, Yasmin, sorry, yes, we have both Yasmin and Jasmine in Jaslika. Sorry, still, Yasmin, there is a question from, let me see, Mentakawira. Why no books in some schools while I have been to several schools with an extra book, with extra books which they have no place to store? So I think Kawira is alluding to the allocation from government, but then it seems that in the informal settlements, these books are still not enough. Why the inequality in the supply and access? Maybe you can take 1 minute to answer.
Sure. So again, thank you very much for bringing it up. As I had shared earlier, there are books, but books are not enough. So you find in a class, like let's say you walk into Olympic Primary or Toi Primary or Ayani Primary, those public schools, we have books, but the kids are too many. The children are too many, and they are forced to share these books. Because today, if let's say I'll take a Kiswahili book, another kid will take science, like it's not enough for each and every student. So, but the books are there. So that's what I meant. And you'll find if you've been given an assignment on Kiswahili and you have science book, you'll have to go to your friend, to a friend's house, so that you'll get the Kiswahili book because you don't have the Kiswahili and they have Kiswahili. And as an organization, we come in this way whereby our community library facilitate such kind of books so that it's much easier for them to access rather than going to other households to look, because again, it exposes them to harm and violence such as the GBV, gender-based violence like rape and also defilement, which again is another case and also a story for another day. So we ensure that there is easy access to these books. And again, I repeat, the books are there, but they're not enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. It seems that the government textbook policy of, one book, one child is still not a reality everywhere. It could be a reality in some of the schools where the population is not that high. So there's a policy issue, and of course also the implementation and a bit of holding the teachers to account, because we know that capitation is supposed to actually take account of the population. So I now invite Dr. Celestine to make a comment on community rights as far as education opportunities are concerned, and efforts, solidarity that can be built. And while you're at it, you could also let us know what is, in terms of looking forward into the commentary, how do you see its usefulness for civil society?
Okay, thank you very much. On the question of the marginalized communities, I don't think I could add much more to what Yasmin has already given. And it seems that on the question of solidarity, she already mentioned that they have some affiliation with the Nubian Human Rights Forum. I think that's what it's called. I guess what we might encourage, and maybe through Jaslika and other people here, is a broadening of those alliances on the issue of education, to work with the groups that work on quality of education. There's a group, I forget their name, they used to do very detailed studies, assessing different competences across different ages and comparing children in these disadvantaged communities versus children in other parts of the country. I mean, alliances that are specific to education, I think, would add to that, but I don't think I have anything more to add. Yeah. Okay. You asked about, oh dear, I'm blanking out.
Yes, the forward-looking usefulness of the commentary, because it's a huge project and undertaking, which obviously took enormous resources. So how would you see policymakers and civil society and people in the academic space and researchers making the most use of this book so that it can have impact?
I think the academic community, that's easy, it's a very good teaching resource, and it's easy to organize thematically, so that if I'm teaching family law, I know which chapters to go for that will give me insights to incorporate. So I would see that as an obvious constituency. For policymakers, I'm very glad that Dr. Ngina is here. I'll be very happy to deliver a copy if you tell me how to get it to you, so that as you work on the reporting obligations and all that, you have something very specific to work with. Yeah, I think it'd be a useful tool there. For civil society, there too, I mean, the book is written so that it's easy to pick up a tool here, a tool there. You don't have to read the whole 640 something pages at once. And actually, if I may share, Dr. Wamahu and I were able to make use of the resource in an advocacy. There was a private senator's bill that was published 2023, but they called for public comments in April this year. And they called it, let me just pull up the name, the Care and Protection of Child Parents Bill 2023. Now, being a private senator's initiative, it didn't get as much publicity as, say, if it was a government bill, right? But this was the concern that this senator from Mombasa, she's nominated, Miraj Abdullahi Abdurrahman. She was basically making these proposals about re-entry of girls who've been pregnant, who are taking care of children, etc. The very same things we've been talking about. So when it went out for public comment, we actually did comment and we referred them to the resource, and we raised issues for correction or, you know, suggestions for change. For example, we insisted that they include the word quality, to say quality education, not just any education. And we're able to refer to this ECOWAS decision from Sierra Leone, where Sierra Leone was criticized for, yes, allowing girls who had children to come back to school, but they put them on a different curriculum that was much less than the full high school curriculum. So things like that we've been able to use. So others could do the same. I mean, you pick up and you can find experiences in other countries that help to inform advocacy here. So I think it's a useful tool across the board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to quickly read, there's a question for, I think it should go to Dr. Purity Gina, and actually, there are two. One is a comment from Professor Grace Bunyi, Kenyatta University. The only issue with STEM and girls is that opportunities after university, especially outside teaching, are rather limited. Dr. Gina, do you agree with this perspective? What has been your experience? Because you've been doing a lot of research on issues of education. And then at the same time, there is, of course, the concern of children staying in school and not being able to learn, and yet CBC was supposed to take care of this. So what is your take on these issues, Dr. Gina?
Thanks. I think the question number one about STEM, I think the data is still showing that girls have not ventured in STEM courses. And I would say that with confidence, because where I am now, I'm attending a construction authority conference. And a lot of data was presented. We only have, we have 25, for example, registered engineers. And I think the percentage of women was very small. And hence, we still have a long way to go. But even those that are there, is the environment favorable for them? Because one of the things we have to recognize is that if the system treat the two gender, yes, equally, give them opportunity, they need also to do more to ensure that women are able to thrive. And this includes some of the spaces, safety issues, lactation policies, and all that. Actually, one of the things that you will see that is interesting when you go to construction site, and sorry, I feel like I'm getting out of the question, is that they still put men at work, and there you're finding women working. And so you wonder, why are we very invisible? So this, yes, I have done some work with the UNESCO GOK mentorship program, and we have gone to many schools still trying to ensure that girls get to take those STEM courses. Is the number equal to men, to boys? No. Of course, there is other now conversation when I mentioned about that. Are we talking about equality of outcome? And I don't want to get into that conversation because I think that one requires deeper reading, deeper analysis, and all that. In terms of children in school and not learning, I think this is, when the exams are I mean, the other system, like last year we had 48,000 E's. And the question then, these children probably just wrote their names, maybe, I don't know. And maybe they were not able to answer another question. But what CBC promises that every child become engaged, become empowered, and become ethical. That is the end goal. And we nurture everyone's potential. And hence then the introduction of these three streams. Even when that is so, I think we should not forget the place that foundational competencies play in terms of giving you power. This thing they call Matthew effect in education, that those who have will continue having, because the more you're able to read, then the more you're able to become globally competitive, the more you're able to become more empowered and all that. So I think that is why that you'll still see a lot of assessments happening in terms of checking SDG 4.1.1 because of that, notion that the foundational competencies are very critical. And I think that is true. Does that take away the wanting to nurture every child's potential? No, I think it actually ensures that every child's potential is nurtured. But the bottom line is that even as you get into sports, then are you able to communicate, whether it is using indigenous language or using English and Swahili? If you get into the space where you are in social sciences, do you have these core competencies that the competence-based education has prioritized? So I think it's a very progressive curriculum, but we still need to question whether children are in school and learning. We can't take away that aspect.
Okay, so hopefully in another few years when we do those assessments, we should start to see the impact of CBC in terms of changing the narrative of children being in school. It would seem that Jedida Rutere concurs with you on, that is Dr. Gina, on the importance of research. This is paramount for achievement of equality education and training for women and girls in Kenya and beyond. But she does have a question. What programs are in the NGEC on education in terms of creating awareness on gender issues in the space of education?
Thanks. Can I come? I think I came in very fast. But NGC, as I mentioned, one of its mandates is to conduct public education. So we, and in matters of equality and inclusion. So we do a lot of, every quarter we have more than 6 coordination, convening, where people, sometimes we are targeting women, sometimes we are targeting minorities and marginalized, and we are going to where Wanjiko is. However, maybe I'll still come back to research because I feel like then what else can NGC do? It has done public education. People are aware of their policies and, the community is aware. NGC is monitoring the compliance from the policy space. So you have made the Wanjiko to be aware of their rights and you are supporting them, including giving them legal aids in case anything does not happen. And then you're checking compliance. The issue then is, how do you issue an advisory? If I wanted to issue an advisory to the Ministry of Education on something, how do I issue it without concrete research evidence or even suggestions of what works? If we are reviewing the gender policy, for example, that I think is still it has not been finalized, how do I ensure that that aspect of it being transformative is seen in the lens of from the gender perspective, but also from the education perspective? So I think education will, research will still play a big role. Of course, the limitation is that NGC is not an implementer. So probably some of the programs that can be implemented can be done by State Department of Gender because they have that mandate. But for us, it's more of compliance, but we do public education. And of course, now we have research as one of the of the other thing that we conduct. Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. There's one more question with your indulgence, and then we will close. And I think both Sheila and Celestine will have a chance to comment. And I think Celestine has already started to respond to it. It's coming from Lynette Okongo, who wanted the panelists to say something a little more on how the childcare issues and the rights of the girl mothers are taken care of in the protocol, because it is important for their empowerment and continuation of their education. And of course, potential. So Dr. Celestine says that on the issue of childcare, in the protocol refer to Article 12.2, sub-article C, education and premature exit of girls and women. And then Article 13, both parents bear primary responsibility for children. And then Article 14.2b on establishing and strengthening prenatal, delivery, postnatal health and nutritional services for women. I don't know if she would like to elaborate a little bit on it. Dr. Musembi?
I think I can elaborate. She just asked about the provisions and I've just put them there. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay. But you can see it cuts across because that's beyond the education article to the one on economic and social welfare and then to the one on the sexual and reproductive health. See, so it's a cross-cutting issue.
Okay, and Sheila has qualified that Article 12.2 sub-article C talks about positive action, not just any action, but positive action in order to support re-entry and continuation. And actually, they talk about programs to ensure that those who exit prematurely continue their education by whatever means. And definitely not what Sierra Leone was doing. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's 5 minutes past 8 o'clock, and I know we've had a very engaging conversation, and I apologize in advance because there were many questions that we tried to combine, or at least just review and see which is the most critical. But it does seem to me that this topic obviously has raised a lot of interest, and we may need to convene another forum, particularly that looks at issues of exclusion and this area of young mothers and issues of quality education. So there's a lot to do, and I think as researchers and as activists, we have a lot of work to do. And Dr. Anna Obura says that some of the activists are not reading, so we need to make good use of the data. And Dr. Purity Ngina reminds us that to do a good policy advisory or even to write a good policy brief that goes to policymakers, you really need to capture their attention with facts and evidence. So there's a challenge out for us, and I would like to say a big thank you to the audience. I'll give Sheila half a minute so that we can do the closing. Sheila?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention two things. One, the questions that have not been answered today, we will collate those questions and then give to the different participants, the panelists, to respond. And you will find it up on our website. And related to that, Irene, I would also like to clarify that we have the recording both on this end and the YouTube. And normally our YouTube, the videos, and even this, all our webinars, we actually edit and put on our website so that those who have not been able to access, we see it as a resource. So I just wanted to clarify that. So we usually put the video, the transcription of the video, the session, and the questions, Q&A and additional questions on our website. So you will find it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge the participation of various academic institutions, universities, think tanks, research agencies, NGOs, organizations that are doing advocacy work at grassroots and even at national level, and individual researchers and people who have a personal interest in this subject. So thank you very, very much. And I wish you a great evening. Apologies that we ran a little bit out of time. So you can exit the platform. And I will ask the panelists to remain for 1 minute, as well as the Jaslika team. Thank you, everyone, and good evening.
Thank you. Carolyn Stremlo, thank you so much for coming. And Kirubo has left, but yeah. Thank you. So I think
I will exit people who are not, let me see, maybe Ali has to do that for us. Exit people.